হরে কৃষ্ণ। আমাদের প্রতিদিন নিত্যম ভাগবত সেবায়া, যে আমাদের ভাগবত পাঠ, এখানে আপনাদের সকলকে স্বাগত জানাই। তো আজকে আমরা শ্রীমদ ভাগবত পাঠ করব। 3.29-25 চ্যাপ্টার। अर्चादावत अर्च एतावत ईश्वरं मम स्वकर्म कृत यवन्ना वेद स्वहृदि सर्वभूतेषु अवस्थितम्। Translation: Performing his prescribed duties, one should worship the deity of the Supreme Personality of Godhead until one realizes my presence in his own heart and in the hearts of other living entities as well. Purport: Worship of the deity of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is prescribed herewith even for persons who are simply discharging their prescribed duties. There are prescribed duties for the different social classes of men: the Brahmanas, the Vaishyas, the Kshatriyas, and the Sudras, and for the different ashramas: Brahmacharya, Grihastha, Vanprastha, and Sannyasa. One should worship the deity of the Lord until one appreciates the presence of the Lord in every living entity. In other words, one should not be satisfied simply by discharging his duties properly. He must realize his relationship and the relationship of all other living entities with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. If he does not understand this, then even though he discharges his prescribed duties properly, it is to be understood that he is simply laboring without profit. The word Swakarmakrit in this verse is very significant. Swakarmakrit is one who engages in discharging his prescribed duties. It is not that one who has become a devotee of the Lord or who engages in devotional service should give up his prescribed duties. No one should be lazy uh, under the play of devotional service. One has to execute a devotional service according to his prescribed duties. Swakarmakrit means that one should discharge the duties prescribed for him without neglect. आत्मनश्च परस्यापि यः करोति अन्तरोदरं तस्य भिन्नादृशो मृत्युर्विदधे विदधे भयम् उल्बणम्. Translation: As the blazing fire of death, I cause great fear to whoever makes the least discrimination between himself and other living entities because of a differential outlook. Purport: There are bodily differentiations among all varieties of living entities, but a devotee should not distinguish between one living entity and another on such a basis. A devotee's outlook should be that both the soul and supersoul are equally present in all varieties of living entities. 3.29.27 अथमं सर्वभूतेषु तत्मानं कृतालयम् अर्हेद् दानमनभयम् मैत्र्यभिन्नेन चक्षुषा. Translation: Therefore, through charitable gifts and attention, as well as through friendly behavior and by viewing all to be alike, one should propitiate me, who abide all creatures as their very self. Purport: It should not be misunderstood that because the supersoul is dwelling within the heart of a living entity, the individual soul has become equal to him. The equality of the supersoul and the individual soul is misconceived by the impersonalist. Here it is distinctly mentioned that the individual soul should be recognized in a relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The method of worshipping the individual soul is described here as either giving charitable gifts or behaving in a friendly manner, free from any separatist outlook. The impersonalists sometimes accept a poor individual soul as being Daridra Narayana, meaning that Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, has become poor. This is a contradiction. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is full in all opulences. He can agree to live with a poor soul or even with an animal, but this does not make him poor. There are two Sanskrit words used here, mana and dana. Mana indicates a superior and dana indicates one who gives charitable gifts or is compassionate towards an inferior. We cannot treat the Supreme Personality of Godhead as an inferior who is dependent on our charitable gifts. When we give charity, it is to a person who is inferior in his material or economic condition. Charity is not given to a rich man. Similarly, it is explicitly stated here that mana respect is offered to a superior and charity is offered to an inferior. The living entities, according to different results of fruitive activities, may become rich or poor, but the Supreme Personality of God is unchangeable. He is always full in six opulences. Treating a living entity equally does not mean treating him as one would treat the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Compassion and friendlessness do not necessitate falsely elevating someone to the exalted position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We should not at the same time misunderstand that the supersoul situated in the heart of an animal like a hog and the supersoul situated in the heart of a learned Brahmana are different. The supersoul in all living entities is the same Supreme Personality of Godhead. By his omnipotency, he can live anywhere and he can create his Vaikuntha situation everywhere. That is his inconceivable potency. Therefore, when Narayana is living in the heart of a hog, he does not become a hog Narayana. He is always Narayana and is unaffected by the body of a hog. 3.29.28 जीवश्रेष्ठा है आजीवनम् तथा प्राणाभृता शुभे तथा सचित्ता प्रवरस् ततश्चेन्द्रियवृत्तया. Translation: living entities are superior to inanimate objects of blessed mother, and among them, living entities who display life symptoms are better. Animals with developed consciousness are better than them, and better still are those who have developed sense perception. Purport: in the previous verse, it was explained that living entities should be honored by charitable gifts and friendly behavior. And in this verse, and in the following verses, the description of different grades of living entities is given to show that one can know when to behave friendly and when to give charity. For example, a tiger is a living entity, part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the Supreme Lord is living in the heart of the tiger as super soul. But does this mean that we have to treat the tiger in a friendly manner? Certainly not. We have to treat him differently, giving him charity in the form of prasada. The many saintly persons in the jungles do not treat the tigers in a friendly way, but they supply prasada foodstuffs to them. And the tigers come, take the food and go away, just as a dog does. According to the Vedic system, a dog is not allowed to enter the house because of their uncleanliness. Cats and dogs are not allowed within the apartment of a gentleman, but are so trained that they stand outside. The compassionate householder will supply prasada to the dogs and cats who eat outside and then go away. We must treat the lower living entities compassionately, but this does not mean that we have to treat them in the same way we treat other human beings. The feeling of equality must be there, but the treatment should be discriminating. Just how discrimination should be maintained is given in the following six verses concerning the different grades of living entity conditions. The first division is made between dead, stone like matter and the living organism. A living organism is sometimes manifested even in stone. Experience shows that some hills and mountains grow. This is due to the presence of the soul within that stone. Above that, the next manifestation of the living condition is development of consciousness, and the next manifestation is the development of sense perception. In the Moksha Dharma section of the Mahabharata, it is stated that trees have developed sense perception. They can see and smell. We know by experience that trees can see. Sometimes in its growth, a large tree changes its course of development to avoid some hindrances. This means that a tree can see, and according to Mahabharata, a tree can also smell. This indicates the development of sense perception. Slok 3.29.29 तत्रपि स्पर्शवेदिभ्यया प्रभराराशवेदिना तेभ्यो गन्धाविदा श्रेष्ठास्ततः शब्दो विदो हरा. Translation: among the living entities who have developed sense perception, those who have developed the sense of taste are better than those who have developed only the sense of touch. Better than them are those who have developed the sense of smell, and better still are those who have developed the sense of hearing. Purport: although Westerners accept that Darwin first expounded the doctrine of evolution, the science of anthropology is not new. The development of the evolutionary process was known long before from the Bhagavatam, which was written 5,000 years ago. There are records of the statements of Kapila Muni, who was present almost in the beginning of the creation. This knowledge has existed since the Vedic time, and all the sequences are disclosed in Vedic literature. A theory of gradual evolution or anthropology is not new to the Vedas. It is said here that amongst the trees there are also evolutionary processes. The different kinds of trees have touch perception. It is said that better than the trees are the fish, because fish have developed the sense of taste. Better than the fish are the bees, who have developed the sense of smell, and than are the serpents, because serpents have developed the sense of hearing. In the darkness of night, a snake can find its eatables simply by hearing the frog's very pleasant cry. The snake can understand there is the frog, and he captures the frog simply because of its sound of vibration. This example is sometimes given for persons who vibrate sounds simply for death. One may have a very nice tongue that can vibrate sound like the frogs, but that kind of vibration is simply calling death. The best use of the tongue and of the sound vibration is to chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. That will protect one from the hands of cruel death. 3.29.30 रूपभेदाविदस्तत्र ततस्को भयतो दता तेषां बहुपदा श्रेष्ठास् चतुष्पदस्ततो द्विपद. Translation: better than those living entities who can perceive sound are those who can distinguish between one from another. Better than them are those who have developed upper and lower sets of teeth, and better still are those who have many legs. Better than them are the quadrupeds, and better still are the human beings. Purport: it is said that certain birds, such as crows, can distinguish one form from another. Living entities that have many legs, like the wasp, are better than plants and grasses which have no legs. Four-legged animals are better than many-legged living entities, and better than the animals is the human being who has only two legs. 3.29.31 ततो वर्णश्च चत्वारस् तेषां ब्रह्मा न उत्तमा ब्राह्मणेष्व अपि वेदाज्ञानो भयर्थज्ञानो भयधिकस्तथा. Translation: among human beings, the society which is divided according to quality and work is best, and in that society the intelligent men who are designated as brahmanas are best. Among the brahmanas, one who has studied the Vedas is the best, and among the brahmanas who have studied the Vedas, one who knows the actual purport of the Veda is the best. Purport: the system of four classifications in human society according to the quality and work is very scientific. The system of Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras has now become vitiated as a present caste system in India. But it appears that this system has been current a very long time, since it is mentioned in Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita. Unless there is such a division of the social orders in human society, including the intelligent class, the martial class, the mercantile class, and the liberal class. There is always confusion as to who is to work for what purpose. A person trained to the stage of understanding the absolute truth is a Brahmana. And when such a Brahman is Veda Jnana, he understands the purpose of the Veda. The purpose of a Veda is to understand the absolute. One who understands the absolute truth in three phases, namely Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan, and who understands the term Bhagavan to mean the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is considered to be the best of the Brahmanas or a Vaishnava. 3.29.32 अर्थज्ञात संशयाचेता तथा श्रेयान् स्वकर्मकृ मुक्तसङ्गस्ततो भुवन् अदुग्धो धर्मम् आत्मना. Translation: better than the Brahmana who knows the purpose of the Vedas is he who can dissipate all doubts, and better than him is one who strictly follows the Brahmanical principles. Better than him is one who is liberated from all material contamination, and better than him is a pure devotee who executes devotional service without exceptions of reward. Purport: Arthajnana Brahmana refers to one who has made it through analytical study of the absolute truth and who knows that the absolute truth is realized in three different phases, namely Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. If someone not only has this knowledge but is able to clear all doubts if questioned about the absolute truth, he is considered better. Further, there may be a learned Brahmana Vaishnava who can explain clearly and eradicate all doubts, but if he does not follow the Vaishnava principles, then he is not situated on a higher level. One must be able to clear all doubts and simultaneously be situated in the Brahmanical characteristics. Such a person who knows the purpose of the Vedic injunctions, who can employ the principles laid down in the Vedic literatures, and who teaches his disciples in that way, is called an acharya. The position of an acharya is that he executes devotional service with no desire for elevation to a higher position of life. The highest perfectionist Brahmana is the Vaishnava. A Vaishnava who knows the science of the absolute truth but is not able to preach such knowledge to others is described as being in the lower stage. One who not only understands the principles of the science of God, mm, but can also preach is in the second stage. And one who not only can preach but who also sees everything in the absolute truth, and the absolute truth in everything is in the highest class of Vaishnavas. It is mentioned here that a Vaishnava is already a Brahmana. In fact, the high stage of Brahmanical perfection is reached when one becomes a Vaishnava. 3.29.33 तस्मन्मयि अर्पिता शेषा क्रियर्थात्मा निरन्तरा मयि अर्पितात्मना पुंसो मयि संन्यस्ता कर्मणा न पश्यामि परं भूतम् अकर्तु समदर्शनात्. Translation: Therefore, I do not find a greater person than he who has no interest outside of mine, and who therefore engages and dedicates all his activities and all his life, everything unto me without cessation. Purport: In this verse, the word Samadarsanat means that he no longer has any separate interest. The devotee's interest and the Supreme Personality of Godhead interest are one. For example, the Lord Chaitanya, in the role of a devotee, also preached the same philosophy. He preached that Krishna is the worshipful Lord, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and that the interest of his pure devotee is the same of his own. Sometimes Mayavadi philosophers, due to a poor fund of knowledge, divine the word Samadarsanat to mean that a devotee should see himself as one with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This is foolishness. When one thinks himself one with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no question of serving him. When there is service, there must be a master. Three things must be present for there to be service: the master, the servant, and the service. Here it is clearly stated that he who has dedicated his life, all his activities, his mind, and his soul, everything for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord, is considered to be the greatest person. The word akartu means without any sense of proprietorship. Everyone wants to act as the proprietor of his actions so that he can enjoy the result. A devotee, however, has no such desire. He acts because the personality of Godhead wants him to act in a particular way. He has no personal motive. When Lord Chaitanya preached Krishna consciousness, it was not with the purpose that people would call him Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Rather, he preached that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and should be worshipped as such. A devotee who is a most confidential servant of the Lord never does anything for his personal account, but does everything for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, it is clearly stated, Mai Sanyasta Karmana, the devotee works, but he works for the Supreme. It is also stated, Mai Arpitaman, he gives his mind unto me. These are the qualifications of the devotee, who, according to this verse, is accepted as the highest of all human beings. 3.29.34 मनसैतानि भूतानि प्रणमदे बहुमानयन् ईश्वर जीवकल्याय प्रभिस्तो भगवान iti. Translation: Such a perfect devotee offers respect to every living entity because he is under the firm conviction that the Supreme Personality of Godhead has entered the body of every living entity as the super soul or controller. He does not make the mistake of thinking that Because the supreme personality of Godhead as Paramatma has entered into the body of every living entity has become the supreme personality of Godhead. This is foolishness. Suppose a person enters into a room, that does not mean that the room has become that person. Similarly, that the Supreme Lord has entered into each of the 8.4 million of species, particular types of material bodies, does not mean that each of these bodies has become the Supreme Lord. Because the Supreme Lord is present, however, a pure devotee accepts each body as a temple of the Lord, and since the devotee offers respect to such temples in full knowledge, he gives respect to every living entity in relationship with the Lord. Mayavadi philosophers wrongly think that because the Supreme Person has entered the body of a poor man, the Supreme Lord has become Daridra Narayan or Poor Narayan. These are these are all blasphemous statements of atheists and non-devotees. 3.29.35 Bhakti yogascha yogascha maya mana vi udirita Yayor ekatare naiva purusha purusham bhrajet. Translation: My dear mother, O daughter of Manu, a devotee who applies the science of devotional service and mystic yoga in this way can achieve the abode of the Supreme Person simply by the devotional service. Purport: Herein the Supreme Personality of Godhead Kapil Deva perfectly explains that the mystic yoga system consisting of 8 different kinds of yoga activities has to be performed with the aim of coming to the perfectional stage of bhakti yoga. It is not acceptable for one to be satisfied simply by practicing the sitting postures and thinking himself complete. By meditation, one must attain the stage of devotional service. As previously described, a yogi is advised to meditate on the form of Lord Vishnu from point to point, from the ankles to the legs, to the knees, to the thighs, to the chest, to the neck, and in this way gradually up to the face and then to the ornaments. There is no question of impersonal meditation. When by meditation on the Supreme Personality of Godhead in all detail, one comes to the point of love of God. That is the point of Bhakti Yoga. And at that point, he must actually render service to the Lord out of transcendental love. Anyone who practices yoga and comes to that point of devotional service can attain the Supreme Personality of Godhead in his transcendental abode. Here it is clearly stated, Purusho Purusham Vrajet. The Purusha, the living entity, goes to the Supreme Person. The Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity are qualitatively one. Both are defined as Purusha. The quality of Purusha exists both in the Supreme Godhead and in the living entity. Purusha means enjoyer, and the spirit of enjoyment is present both in the living entity and in the Supreme Lord. The difference is that the quantity of enjoyment is not equal. The living entity cannot experience the same quantity of enjoyment as a supreme personality of Godhead. An analogy may be made with a rich man and a poor man. The propensity for enjoyment is present in both, but the poor man cannot enjoy in the same quantity as the rich man. When the poor man dovetails his desires with those of the rich man, however, and when there is cooperation between the poor man and the rich man, or between the small man, the small man, then the enjoyment is shared equally. That is like bhakti yoga, Purusha Purusham Rajet. When the living entity enters into the kingdom of God and cooperates with the Supreme Lord by giving him enjoyment, he enjoys the same facility or the same amount of pleasure as Supreme Personality of Godhead. On the other hand, when the living entity wants to enjoy by imitating the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he decides is called Maya, and it puts him in the material atmosphere. A living entity who wants to enjoy on his personal account and not cooperate with the Supreme Lord is engaged in materialistic life. As soon as he dovetails his enjoyment with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is engaged in spiritual life. An example may be cited here. The different limbs of the body cannot enjoy life independently. They must cooperate with the whole body and supply food to the stomach. In so doing, all the different parts of the body enjoy equally in cooperation with the whole body. That is the philosophy of Achintya Bhedaved Tattva, simultaneous, simultaneous oneness and difference. The living entity cannot enjoy life in opposition to the Supreme Lord. He has to dovetail his activities with the Lord by practicing Bhakti Yoga. It is said herein that one can approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead by either the yoga process or the Bhakti Yoga process. This indicates that factually there is no difference between yoga and Bhakti Yoga because the target of the both is Vishnu. In the modern age, however, a yoga process has been manufactured which aims at something void and impersonal. Actually, yoga means meditation on the form of Lord Vishnu. If the yoga practice is actually performed according to the standard direction, there is no difference between yoga and bhakti yoga. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Hare Hare. जगत गुरु शिल प्रभुपाद की जय। पतित पावन शिल गुरु महाराज की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव भक्तवृंद की जय। जय निताय गौर प्रेमानंद।